All right. So thank you again, everyone, for attending this month's event with the Salesforce MVP series. We have our guest for today, Gemma Blezard. She is the founder of the Architect Club and Ladies v Architect. So she is also a Salesforce MVP, is currently on her path to obtaining the CTA. She will talk about what it means to be a Salesforce architect and inspire the community to pursue this as their career path. Her awards include the Salesforce Golden Hoodie Award back in May 2018. We are the city's Tech Woman 100 Award, a Salesforce MVP, BIMA 100, Digital Champion for Change and Computing ENT Role Model of the Year. Gemma established lots of community-based projects. One of them is Ladies v Architects, a community interest company that encourages the growth of top diverse talent in the Salesforce Architect space. So let us welcome Gemma. So,
hi, thank you.
So yes, thank you again for this privilege of having you as our guest. And one of the things that a lot of people are wondering about is, especially here in the Philippines, if you were to count, I'm guessing there's not really a lot of people that would become architects, right? But definitely it's one of those career paths that quite a lot of people are actually aspiring for, right?
Yes.
I'm guessing not just for the financial aspect of it, but also in terms of what you can do with the platform, right? I guess, could you tell us a bit more about what an architect is and what you do?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, let me start by saying actually the privilege is all mine. Thank you very much for inviting me to come and speak to you today. I very much appreciate it. And it's wonderful to see so many people interested in this particular career path, if you like. I'm joining you today from my car. And from a service station in the UK. There is an interesting story behind this. I'm on my way to the hospital today and discovered shortly before the call that they didn't have a meeting room for me. So, you know, we've all been there in that situation. So please bear with me. And I do look very tired because I am. So I will do my best to do this justice for you. What makes it different? What's the whole big deal about architects then? Well, I've been doing Salesforce for 13 years. Actually it's 14 years because we're in May now. So we are actually at the 14-year point. That's crazy. And for me, the architect role is a leadership role. It is something that we all aspire to be because of the weight of, I suppose, when we're working with our clients, when we're working with our stakeholders, if you are an architect, people tend to think that that carries a little bit more weight, certainly because it's an experience-based role. And it tends to be occupied by people who have been doing this a little while and are having strategic conversations with stakeholders and customers as opposed to tactical ones. Well, how does that translate? In the last few years, I've actually discovered that the architect role has emerged thanks to the need for a career path to be to come to the forefront for those of us who have been doing this a while. Salesforce is 21 years old now as a company. There are other companies around. They're not the first IT company in the world, and they're certainly not the first IT company, software company, to create an ecosystem and a set of careers around the platform itself. I suppose from my perspective, having grown up with Salesforce, I started working with Salesforce when I was 24. I'm now 37, and I started off working as a business sales operations analyst. So my role was querying Salesforce, populating Salesforce and refreshing it with key customer and credit risk information, and making sure that the decisions we were making about customers had a strong foundation. that we were making sure that all of our salespeople were equipped and enabled with the information they needed in order to sell our services and products in a meaningful way that spoke to the human need of these people in order to achieve their goals. That meant loading data, that meant configuring page layouts and creating fields and running reports and walking around the floor to help salespeople. Also, it meant joining calls and talking to people in other countries who also looked after Salesforce for their local regions and trying to find out the best way for us all to work together and make sure that Salesforce was as optimized as it could be for every single market that had people logging into it. So that meant Benelux, that meant France, that meant the United States, the UK, Japan, Canada, and various other countries, all having areas of responsibility within the system, but also carrying the responsibility of making sure that not only were people enabled, but that the system was robust and could live for much longer than people would have expected it to. What that meant was putting governance processes in place, putting strategic frameworks in place to help people make decisions. How do we know that this is a field? Because somebody came and asked me to build them a field and I built them a field, versus how do I know that this is a field? Well, somebody came along and asked me, gave me a requirement, and told me what they needed to achieve. And from that requirement, I deduced that the best way for us to achieve that within the context of all of our design standards and IT policies was for us to build a field. Do you see the difference? It's the difference. And for me, the architect's job is about recognizing that it's about more than just creating the field. It's about understanding what are we trying to achieve by introducing this field into our system. As in, this is a pure example. Or this report or this integration. What are we trying to achieve? Why are we introducing this integration? Why are we running this report? What decisions are driven by this report and the information that's surfaced through it? How are people going to keep that information secured and accessible only to the most appropriate people? But also, how are we going to comply with international privacy laws? How are we going to ensure that we are effectively advertising why we're keeping this data, how long we're going to keep it for, how we're going to destroy it, etc. So for me, an architect sees the big picture. An architect is a leader. An architect has a responsibility to coach and guide others in their decision-making processes by understanding what it actually is that the customer needs. How is this requirement that you've been given serving the best needs of the people who stand to benefit from it? In the last few years, I've observed with the growth of Salesforce has been a growth of complexity. And when you have a growth in complexity, you also, and as your scope of the project that you're delivering starts to widen, you start to have bigger challenges come and hit you in the face, political challenges, especially when you've got something as high profile as Salesforce. You have certainly different agendas for people involved. The person who is looking after Salesforce and owns that function for a business is very keen to ensure that Salesforce is successful, and they have a vested interest and they care very much about the success of that system and how that success is perceived across the business. As an architect, your role, you'll often be, if you're a customer facing architect, let's say you work in consultancy, you've got to prove your worth. Somebody's paying quite often a very large fee for you to be there and support them and to give them advice. So it's important. There's pressure on you as an architect, but there's also pressure on the owner, the business owner of Salesforce, to really prove that that investment's been worthwhile. So you have to be able to prove that you are really helping, that you fully spend the time to understand why you've been called in there in the first place, and also to ensure that those customers can really help themselves going forward, and they don't have to keep pulling in architects and consultants all the time to help them make Salesforce successful. With complexity comes additional pressure and sometimes politics around which systems are being used, which system is the system of record for customers. In Salesforce tells us all the time that it should be Salesforce being the system of record. Look at this fantastic platform that you can put all your stuff on and you can run your business off. But actually, it might be a strategic business decision not to have Salesforce as the system of record, but for Salesforce to act as a place for customer service agents to go so that they can work in one single place. And then we just surface the information that they need from other systems, which are the master for customer data. So all of those different, that melting pot of different scenarios and different agendas and different policies are what makes an architect role so important, because we have to navigate that. Not only do we have to decide what solution we're going to position, but we also have to help and enable the people who work in the team who are going to be building it. We have to help and enable the people in the team who are making the decisions about what requirements are in place, but also ensuring that there is a wider strategy around Salesforce and it's not just being thrown into a business environment and ignored for years and years and years, and getting to the point where finally the IT department realized that the business is using Salesforce, go, oh my goodness, you've got this strategic business system and we haven't been able to wrap our policies around it. So, and it's not going to change because Salesforce is growing and selling into household names. I mean, British Airways uses Salesforce. We see it all the time at World Tour. British Airways is a massive airline. It's like the national airline for the UK. It's part of a wider group of other international airlines that are the airlines for their respective countries. So it's really important for us to make sure, because this is affecting the way people travel, the way people eat, the way people work, the way people receive healthcare. Salesforce is buying itself and is really selling itself into institutions and organizations that affect our daily lives now. So from my perspective, I find it incredibly important to make sure that we get that right wherever we can. The architect's role in that is the glue that holds it together. So I'm aware I've rambled for like the last 5 minutes. Has anybody got any questions or comments about what I've just been talking about?
Let me check. So far, not yet. Hopefully that, yeah, you actually discussed quite a lot of things, especially in terms of how architects really help, not just on the tactical and more importantly, it's actually on the strategic implementations, right? So most of us, if not all, actually are familiar with Trailhead, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I see Trailhead sort of more focused on the tactical aspect, although I'm sure there are those strategic things, right? In terms of learning to have that architect mindset, is there any specific resources for those that want to start on their own? Because not everyone would have the privilege of be given the chance to become architects right away, right? Usually, it's actually something that they have to go through or be prepared for the role before they get it, right? So what are some of the things that you would recommend for people to start out?
A lot of it starts at home, within your own personality and your own interpersonal skills. You can go onto Trailhead and learn the tactics. How do I decide whether this is a flow versus whether this is a field or a piece of code? The first place you can go for guidance is the Salesforce Architect's website, because that helps you to scope. It gives you tips for identifying a scenario and then actually making decisions about how you will address and answer the questions and solve the problems using the combination of road mapping, scoping, and deploying. So I would say that the Architect's website is a great first place to start. Another great place to start is to look inside yourself, look at your own personal skills and the way that you interact with other people. I have a very high amount of empathy, and that has always been part of my personality. I've always wanted to just help people. I find it quite easy to listen to people and understand where they're coming from. So practicing empathy in your real life, putting your own agenda to one side and actually taking time to listen actively to what people are telling you and asking you will help you to understand a problem better. Yes, your brain will start ticking away with, oh my gosh, you're talking about renewals. Yeah, I've done this before with a client. I'm completely on board with this. You've got to really resist the temptation to shout that out straight away. And certainly it's something that I personally need to work on as well. We all do. But being able to identify those, being able to really listen to a business's problem and empathize with it and be able to point them in the right direction without necessarily throwing knowledge down their throat is a really good way to do that. Other ways you can do it is if you have the opportunity to perhaps take on some freelance or outsourced work, then helping out and shadowing is a good start. And also taking part in discussions, right? Encouraging discussions amongst yourselves. It's very easy for someone to say, you know, I have a requirement for a custom field that will allow me to mark whether this is a renewal opportunity or not. What your people are actually doing is bringing solutions to you. They're not bringing problems to you. So how you can help to develop your architect skills is to roll it back and encourage people to say, okay, I understand you think you need a field. Well, don't say you think you need a field because they'll think that you're just ripping them to shreds. But if you can use appropriate language that is empathic in nature, that says, okay, tell me more about why you need to, I know this sounds like a really daft question, but tell me why is it so important to track renewals? Well, because we need to be able to grow the business. Okay, so when you're renewing your contracts and you're growing the business, are you applying an uplift? Yes or no? Or maybe, or sometimes, or, you know, just capturing and understanding those situations. So raising your thinking out of the hands-on what I need to do right now and up into the what are we all trying to achieve by doing this. That is another way that you can start to grow those skills.
Great. Yep. Erwin, any questions so far? I'm not sure.
Well, I just would like to comment. I've taken down a few notes here, and I appreciate that whenever we talk to architects, it's we all know that it's a leadership role, but I like it when you said that you help enable people in teams. So I really appreciate that. And when you talked about creating a field, it's more than just creating a field, but understanding the why behind it. So yeah. Thank you for making that clear. Making realize that architects need to see the big picture. Now, we all know that as the recent years have come, the Salesforce Architect has become more and more for many, more than it is a role. So, can you explain what you think is the difference between the architect, the role, versus the coveted CTA certifications?
Yes, certainly. Can you hear me all right and see me all right?
Yes.
Just checking. Cool. So I'm just going to turn on my car so that I don't run out of battery and lose you all. Okay. So when you, and that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that, because the role itself, I see there are multiple flavors of architects that exist. There is the architect, there is the solution architect, and we actually published an article about this on the Salesforce Ben website recently, whereby we talk. I don't know why that's beeping. Why are you beeping? Because the door was open. Thank you. When we look at the different roles available, there are different concerns that are in place here, because when you look at Salesforce, you're looking at not just what are we going to build inside Salesforce, so what happens when and at what click, And how do users log in? How do we collect information from a website? And what do we then do with it once we've received it? But there's all the other stuff around it as well. How do we educate people? How do we create operating models? How do we productize Salesforce? How do we make sure that it is sustainable for the future? And at the moment, with these different roles, what we have talked about is the difference between solution architects and technical architects and enterprise architects, integration architects, and then finally the piece and data architects as well. We've actually laid these out in the context of a nightclub. So when you look at a solution architect, they're interested in they are effectively the club manager. What is happening inside my club? How do I make sure that everybody is able to get to the bar? How do I make sure that the right music is playing that people will enjoy and want to dance to? How do I ensure that when I'm running a COVID safe nightclub, how do I ensure that everybody's walking in the right direction? How do I police the wearing of face masks, etc.? It's a similar situation inside Salesforce. How do I make sure that everybody who comes into my Salesforce instance can get to the things that they need to get to? How do I make sure they can't sneak off into the VIP area without the right wristband on? How do I make sure that that if they have placed an order for a drink and I'm running a promotion, how do I make sure that they receive the benefits of that promotion inside Salesforce, even if that is something very straightforward? But then equally, the other side of this is the separation of concerns for a technical architect. Your technical architect is almost like the door person. How do I make sure that only secure information that has been pre-approved, for example, your guest list, or certainly in COVID safe times at the moment, everybody has to book in advance to say whether they're going to come to the nightclub or not. So how do I make sure that everybody who arrives at that door is over 18, has the appropriate wristband, has registered? And at what point do I let them in? And then how do I close that feedback loop how does my club manager tell my door person that there's no more capacity inside the club? So that's how I would separate out those two things. So solution architects being very concerned about the handoffs between data elements coming in and out of Salesforce, but then also ensuring that that the data we receive and give out is appropriately utilized to make the decisions that need to be made by the users of Salesforce. And then from the technical architect standpoint, making sure that the information, a nightclub can't make money if it doesn't have people coming in and out, right? So how do I make sure the right people are coming in and out at the right time? And securely, and that is what I would see as being the role of the technical architect, is that what is the role of Salesforce within the wider technical architectural landscape? How do I ensure that there is appropriate governance and that Salesforce is being operated according to policies, and that the volumes are sustainable, and that the patterns, the way we integrate with Salesforce, in terms of those patterns, do we use remote calling versus using something like MuleSoft, and what are the protocols, and at what point, what's the cardinality of that data? That role is incredibly important, but there is a crossover point between the solution architect as well, because the solution architect needs to consume that data in order for the solutions to work properly. And then looking at the data architecture side of things, how do we make sure that once the data is in the system, that it is kept clean, that it is easy to access, that there are duplicates that are being managed, that the data is of a sufficient quality? And then finally, on the business side of things, we talk about enterprise architects and transformation architects, and I see there as two very different roles. Your enterprise architect is looking at, okay, how are we actually using IT? And all of the different systems, how are they pulling together in order to deliver value to the business? How is my business going to make money by being supported by all of these systems working together and harmonizing together like a symphony orchestra? And on the transformation side, how do we actually get our people ready for this change? How do we what kind of organizational structure do we need? And we aim to address those questions with it by creating that role and the responsibilities that go with that role, to say that actually this goes beyond Salesforce and the system. We're actually saying you need to consider how your business needs to be structured in order to get the very best out of the combination of players and tools in order to drive business value and to increase revenue and to create a satisfying environment for all of those people. So these roles, these different flavors of architects all come together. In some projects, you might need all of them. In other projects, you might just need an SA with an enterprise architect. In other projects, you might need a technical architect, a data architect, and solution architect with consultants supporting, or with admins and developers actually pulling together to deliver the tactics against the strategy that the architects all come up with together. So does that answer your question? I appreciate it's a long-winded answer,
Yeah.
and the answers will change quite a lot.
Well, you've given us quite a lot to think through. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I appreciate a lot of these don't come with a lot. I tend to think of these as what questions are you addressing under each of these roles, and what are the overlaps and crossover points between the roles.
Based on our discussion, a lot of it really, the value that Architect brings is, I know quite a lot of people are really focusing a lot on the technical aspect, right? I would say
Yeah.
An architect not just needs the technical aspect, but equally important, if not more important, are the soft skills, right? Basically, being able to empathize, being able to understand what they need, and being able to question things like, hey, why are you asking for this? What is the business value of what we're trying to do? If we're not going to use this in any meaningful way, why are we going to track this? Why do we need a field for it, right? So a lot of those things are the type of things that at least people that I know don't necessarily get to touch, because a lot of the many cases is that, as you mentioned, the solution is actually already being brought here, and then, hey, just implement this, right? So being able to think through that and be able to push back on things that, hey, have you actually thought through this? And is this actually the best approach? That's where we actually should be differentiating ourselves, right? Rather than just focusing on the technical aspect and tactical ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more on that front. That's how you differentiate yourself, is by actually recognizing that you're dealing with a customer relationship management system. The clue is in the middle word, relationship. Relationships are present technically, but more importantly, you are tracking customer business relationships, and they are orchestrated by people. So it still comes back to people. And where I've seen these projects go wrong is where people get forgotten or deprioritized in favor of, oh, we have to get this live by the end of June. I don't care what it takes. We have to go live with Service Cloud by the end of June. Okay, Service Cloud by the end of June. What does that mean? Well, that means case management. That means live agent. That means knowledge management, because that's what we all know we have to deliver tactically. But who is actually standing up and saying to the business, okay, how are you as a business getting ready for Service Cloud coming in by the end of June? How are you preparing your customers for this change? What are you actually going to tell your staff about the new way of working? Oh, we'll communicate that when we get closer to go live. And that's when projects stall, and that's when projects go wrong, is because they get closer to go live and realize that actually now they've started to involve their users. The users have got a bit of a pushback here. Why are you pushing? Why are we going to be working this way? Why is it that I have to, if a customer's got a question and I can't answer it, I have to tell them to then email this email address? Why do I have to then pass them on to another agent? Why do I have to pass them on to another team? Classic example, right? I've got cancer. I have stage 4 breast cancer. It is not going to get any better. When I phone up my health insurance company, I speak to them and say, okay, cancer team, thank you very much for authorizing all my treatments and organizing everything with the oncologist. That's why I look so tired, because I'm just really tired today. But then I am one person, and I am also might actually have a lot of ups and downs in my own personal life around my illness. I have a 9-year-old daughter. It's not very nice to be told that you're not going to make it to old age, especially when you've got a young child like that. So when I phone up my insurance company, I want to speak to one person who knows my situation. When I tell them I need to speak to a psychologist because I want some help with dealing with the emotional trauma that comes with such a massive change and a massive diagnosis on my life, I don't want to have to be handed over to another team just because that's the way that their operating model is, because of the way that they have to train their staff. Mental health and oncology are two specialist forms of healthcare, and they require different skill sets. But this is a case in point where, you know, to operationalize this service for your people, you end up having to silo those two specific disciplines because of the depth and the intensity and the amount of training that's required to support those people in those situations. But actually, my challenge to the health insurers, to go back to them, is actually around customer experience, because my customer experience is I want to phone up the oncology team because that's who I have the relationship with. And I want to say to them, and they say, how are you feeling, Gemma? And I go, do you know what? I'm really struggling today. I feel like crying. I don't want to get out of my bed. I want to talk to somebody who knows how to help me deal with this mental trauma. And they say, oh, okay, I understand what you're saying. And you can hear them taking notes, and you can hear exactly what's coming next, because you know they're reading a script and they're reading knowledge articles and they're being told to hand it over to the mental health team. And I'm the one going, I understand what you're saying. However, look at this customer experience. I'm going to, and they say, oh, you know what, we'll raise a dissatisfaction on your behalf. I'm like, you will, because the dissatisfaction here is that you are going to hand me off to another person, another team, and actually I am only one person. I have a head, I also have, you know, which is struggling. I also have a body which is struggling, but I want to talk to somebody who is a specialist in counselling people who have cancer. Do you have anybody like that on your team who spans both disciplines? And the woman on the end of the phone's going, no, we don't. So actually, that's an important part for us to do as architects. If we did, I mean, that's a very specific example, but customer experience is the main message here, because experience that I expect to receive is that even as a customer, oh, sorry, dropping my phone everywhere. Even as a customer, I want to know that there's a mechanism for me to, first of all, express that dissatisfaction. But second of all, know that my feedback isn't landing on deaf ears, that they're actually listening and they have a way and ways and means of recording that feedback and acting upon it. For me, that is crucial. And it's really that sort of vision that gets forgotten about. It's everybody's so hung up in making sure that they deliver to the objectives that have been handed down to them from on high, that actually I find that the more successful projects come when people look at the whole experience and say, okay, that's a really, really bad experience, but we've just got to get it live. That can cause projects to fall down and stall. Whereas actually, if you just looked at it a different way and said, okay, the customer experience is that it needs to be holistic. We don't need to tell our customers to phone a different phone number to speak to the mental health team. What if that agent could loop in someone from the mental health team and they both speak to the customer at the same time? That's pretty much unheard of in a customer service environment, isn't it? I mean, when have you ever heard of being able to speak to two customer service agents at the same time? And that all comes down to money and cost and expense. And it all comes down to process and bureaucracy. And the technology is supporting that process and bureaucracy. But my challenge is to you to really differentiate yourselves, is to actually go in there and focus on people first and say, do you know what, if we build this experience, that creates a fantastic opportunity for us to design. Yes, it might be more complicated on the other side with the architecture, but look at the opportunity we've got to string all that together in favor of serving the best interests of the people that we look after. And for me personally, that for me is the difference between architecting and your bog standard admin developer approach.
Yeah, I really love how you made it in a way that the focus really is on the customer, it's not just a tagline, right? But it's really understanding what they're going through and the things that they have to go through in order to get to something, right? And of course, many times we're just told to do this and not really necessarily understanding the big picture of what's the business scenario and what the business value is, right? And thank you for sharing that. And before anything else, and I just wanted to let you know, I know it's really hard to go through the sickness, and our team here and the community in the Philippines are definitely supporting you in your journey. And yeah, I know it's definitely something that's hard, right? But if you need to talk to someone, I mean, we're here. So just wanted to let you know about that.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you. I will have to stop now because I do need to get off to the hospital very shortly. But I wanted to open up if there are any questions, or if any of you want to, any of you want to pick up a conversation with me individually, please feel free to send me a message on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and I would be more than happy to talk to you further about any and address any questions that you have.
Sure. I guess we have just one last question from the audience. So what is the most difficult experience or difficult solution you've had being a solution architect, and how were you able to handle the solution? So
I've got one really recently, actually. I've got a customer that sells training courses and is wanting to basically give an e-commerce experience online. And for me, that's been quite challenging because looking at it, they want to basically replicate e-commerce functionality, but they also want to track abandoned cart. And they want to do this without buying an e-commerce solution. They want it all to happen out of Salesforce. So yesterday we were on a call going through, and we opened up Lucidchart and just started to throw some things out of our brains and onto paper. And said, okay, let's talk about this customer experience. Customer logs in. Customers interested in a training course. They might pick 3 dates, and then they might actually only go on to book 1 of those courses. And they said, yeah, and we need to know about the other 2 courses that they didn't book. Okay, why do you need to know that? Well, we want to be able to send them options for more courses. We want to be able to send them additional dates. We want to make them aware of different commercial offerings that we've got that might help them actually book onto those courses, etc., etc. We started to look at this and draw it out, and it became very clear very early on that it was becoming a very complex solution inside Salesforce, with a custom object, replacing a multi-select pick list and putting preferences on there, and then having it hooked up to Pardot, creating journeys, linking it to campaigns. We were looking at this going, okay, this is complex. What kind of staff commitment have you got towards Salesforce at the moment? Well, it turned out they didn't have a Salesforce admin. So we're like, okay, alarm bells. Have you got an e-commerce solution because actually we would be building this, and there are other applications out there that already do it for you. And if you carry on, and the conversation and recommendation that we had to give them in the end was, if you carry on in this route, you'll be spending a lot of time every month going through these requirements, solutioning them. Then that's before you've even got to building it. Longer term, I know you don't have the budget right now, right? I totally get it. It looks like a much bigger upfront cost for you to invest in a solution that does all this out of the box, right? And I get it. It's been a global pandemic. However, you are spending more money in the long run by tackling it this way than you would be if you actually went out there and did some looking and took your requirements, built a proper framework, evaluated some of these tools, and looked at how much of what you were going, what you were going to build. So for example, if I'm going to build this preference marketing thing, that's 6 beans. That's six counters in terms of effort. That's 6 coins that I need to put in the pot for designing that. Then there are another 6 coins I need to put in the pot for building it. There's another 6 coins I need to put in the pot for testing it. Whereas actually in this situation, because it's a very specific application, if they just looked at some of the other e-commerce and training course applications out there, they might find that because those apps already do that out of the box, that's actually only 4 beans versus, you know, 4 coins versus the 6 coins you put into the pot for doing it yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that has been hard because that's been an exercise in persuasion.
Yeah, it's really about making clear for the business folks to understand that, hey, that's not a great idea. So a lot of it at the end of the day is all about the business value, right? How much revenue they can get or how much lesser cost they can do it, right? It's really just being able to explain to them that, hey, this is the corresponding cost if you were to do it. And this is the corresponding cost if you were to just buy it off the shelf, right? And
buy not build conversations are a huge part of our job, massive part of our job. And like we all say, you can only lead the horse to water. Sometimes they will get on and do something against the advice that you've given them. And all you can really do in that situation is get it in writing, get it confirmed that this is the advice that you've given them. They've chosen to go down this other route. You've explained the pros and cons. Off you go, kind of thing. It's about knowing when yeah, picking your battles wisely.
Yeah, I know you need to go though. I wouldn't want to keep you up, but really appreciate the time and definitely a big privilege for every one of us. And of course, you've gone through a lot, and really thank you again.
That's okay, thank you.
Yep.
I am feeling a little bit nauseous, so I'm going to have to go, but I love you all very much, and I hope that you have found this session useful. Like I say, if you want to find me on Twitter, my Twitter handle is at Gemzibeth, GEMZIEBETH, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well, and I'd be more than happy to answer any more questions that you have.
Sure, thank you again, and yeah, stay safe, and yeah. All right.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All
Take
right.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, Erwin. So I'll let you take it. So. Erwin, still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, okay.
I'm always chubby. Okay, so how do you pick up from such a conversation, architect discussion, and talking to someone who's going through the emotions of dealing with the cancer? So quite a unique talk that we have tonight, and the fact he was even able to correlate what she's going through with the business process of a service console. So talk about putting life and work together. So yeah, I hope you were able to pick up a few good points from Gemma's discussion, and I think at this point we'll be doing a little bit of raffling.
Yep. I'll stop the recording now.